That was like a cliffhanger right there. Hey, if you don't know by now, you haven't been listening. It is our 1-year anniversary today, and we're incredibly excited that you chose to be with us today. It's also week 1 of the football season. Who's excited about their team? Maybe going 1-0. It's possible, even for Cardinals fans. What a day. It's been an entire year of watching God do the miraculous. And for the person here that's like, I'm just new to this thing, I've only been here a couple of times, I wanted to share, and we don't get any of the glory here. We get none of it. This is all God's. And but I wanted to share with you just a quick recap of some of the things that God did over this last year. So before we actually even started 1 year ago today, we did a massive overhaul of this property. You saw some of that in the video, but a ton of people gave of their time, their talent. People helped fund all of the things that we had to do to make this place what it is today. But that was an incredible undertaking. We helped feed, church, you need to know this, we helped feed thousands of homeless people this last year. Thousands. We gave over 120 Christmas presents to kids that didn't have a Christmas present coming. And y'all, I need some of y'all giving me Christmas presents because I saw some of the gifts you guys are giving. Dang, like you went to like Macy's. You guys were doing it big. We gave over 120 gifts away. We also, just a month ago, we partnered with the 2 elementary schools closest to us that said, hey, we got a bunch of kids and they don't have backpacks and they don't have supplies and they don't have what they need for day 1. And we said, yeah, we'll make that happen for you. So we gave over 100 backpacks with supplies to kids that did not have a first day. When I was meeting with the teachers there, one of them they were showing me the break room, and they were like, man, it'd be great if we had coffee. It got cut out of our budget. And I said, well, that's crazy, because caffeinated teachers are better than uncaffeinated teachers. Hey, so let's just make that happen. So we decided we're just going to provide coffee to both of the entire faculty staffs at 2 different schools. So in their break rooms, they have coffee for the entire year. We took our first mission trip to Tijuana. We built a home for a lady and her family that hadn't had a home that was owned in their family in generations. And so we had a generational shift out of poverty when we went on that mission trip. We shared Jesus with many people. You saw we had a fall festival and an Easter egg hunt where we had 2,000 people show up and participate in those things. That was super cool. We started with 1 service. We had a 10 a.m. service when we launched last year, and by March of this year, we realized this ain't gonna work anymore, and we gotta figure something else out. It was way early in our timing. We thought year 2 or 3, we'd think about a second service, but 6 months in, God grew this thing faster than we ever thought, and so we had to go to a second service, and we're not far off from a third service, just so you know. All the volunteers just teared up a little bit. Yeah, or let's just build a new building if that's okay with you guys. Let's do a capital campaign. No, I'm just kidding. Said no pastor ever. It's a horrible idea. I'm just kidding. That week after our launch Sunday, it was crazy. Launch Sunday was nuts. But the next Sunday, we had 70 adults and 25 kids. So we launched the church with about 95 people, and we were ecstatic about it. And we were just so thankful that God would trust us with 100 people and their souls and their development. And I'll tell you that today, over this even through the summer, we are closing in on 300 people a week. And so God has multiplied this thing times 3 in 1 year. My wife said something about Growth Track. This was a dream that we would be able to tell people who we are as a church, how they are intricately designed to be used by God, and how they can get involved in the local church. That's what Growth Track is, just so you know. It is your next step. But we started this after Easter, and we had a goal, I don't know, maybe 20 people, 30 people. We've had almost 50 people graduate through Growth Track, and 95+% of them started serving in the church. That's a big win. That's a big goal. Even if it's just me. Some of you are like, I don't care. Well, I care because it's been awesome. Growth Track has been incredible. This is going to be a weird celebration, but it's a celebration for me. In an entire year and all the services we've done, we never passed an offering plate one time. And I want you to know why that's significant to me. We want to be a church that builds the foundation on trusting in God, in believing in God, and being a cheerful and generous person. So we decided, hey, we're not going to guilt people. We don't want to shame people into giving. I'm not saying churches that take offering do that, but it was a conviction for me. And it was a 3-month plan. All my coaches said, you're stupid. You should be having offering collections in the bathroom and in the parking lot and everywhere you could get a hand from someone financially, take it, because the first couple years are really hard, and that's true. But we decided the DNA of our church wanted to be built on generosity, and so we've not taken one offering, and God has met every need that we've had. I've loved that. We've seen over 50 people that told us, that was our big one-year goal, was that we would see at least 50 people come to Christ, and God did it, and we baptized 23 people. And if we would have done a baptism service last weekend, we probably would have got that closer to 40, because I know there's a need for baptism in our church. But good news, I'll tell you why. In 2 weeks, we're doing a baptism service. I'll share it in a moment. Here's one of the things I'm most excited about, and I'm going to put this on the screen, okay? Because we want to be an open-handed church. We're not trying to build the kingdom of the Bridge Church. We're trying to build God's kingdom. And so we don't care what church he uses, what missionary he uses, what school he uses. If you're someone that wants to help people get towards Jesus, we want to help you do it. And so our church, in 1 year as a church startup, we gave $29,000 away to support missions. We support local missionaries. We support Dream Center, which is helping women in tremendous ways. We've done Embrace Grace, which has been an incredible blessing. We support ministries globally and locally. You should know this. You've helped plant many churches this year, just like ours. And we may never cross paths in a church service, but I want you to know there's churches meeting all over the valley right now that you've helped fund and sow seed into, and that's incredible. So that's been a blessing. There's more to say, but the first year has exceeded every expectation I had. I've gained some incredible friends, and I thank you for all the volunteers. This is your moment. Anyone who has volunteered, anyone who has sown a financial seed, anyone who has done anything to help push this thing along, I just want to clap my hands and say thank you. Could not have done it without you, and wouldn't want to even think about what it would be like to do that. So that's where we've been for 1 minute. Let me tell you where we're going over the next month. Next week, we start a series called Level Up. It's how do we take our relationships to the next level? How do you find identity in Christ? This will be an incredible few weeks, 5 weeks together. So invite someone to sit with you. It's a really easy message. It's not going to be hard to bring a guest to. Bridge groups launch on the 15th. Make sure you grab a flyer on the way out, or go online. You can see all of our groups online. Our young adult ministry, 18 to 25, they launch in a couple weeks, and I want you to tell you how they're launching, right? Now, this ain't my thing, right? Because I'm not like a country guy necessarily, but I'm going to come compete. So we're going to put a mechanical bull in this room, and we're also going to have a hatchet throwing competition outside, and we're going to give away awesome gifts, and there's going to be free barbecue, free food. So if you're 18 to 25, make sure you're there. It'll be an awesome night called West Fest, right? West Fest? All right. And then and then on the 22nd, I told you we're doing a baptism service. So if you've made a decision to follow Christ, you have not went underwater, that's your day. Don't miss it. If you're here today and you give your heart to Christ, that's your day. Last two things, Bridge Youth, which we've been dreaming about for a year. Bridge Youth launches on the 25th. It's a Wednesday night. From that Wednesday on, we will have a regular meeting youth ministry Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. right here at the church. But this is the launch event. It's a big carnival thing. We'll do a bunch of carnival games, food, the whole deal. So if you know someone 6th to 12th grade, make sure you let them know that we're doing that. Last thing is Overflow Night. And we're starting that back up in September. And so this is the time if you say, man, I just want to worship God a little bit longer than a Sunday morning. I just want to press in a little bit more. This is your night. Overflow Nights are, we bring in a guest speaker, we worship, we pray, we believe God to do something significant. That's what we do. So just so you know, that's where we've been and that's where we're going. Let me jump into the message, and I need about 20 minutes. And so this can be fast. So get your ears ready, because I talk fast, and this can be extra fast. So just get ready, all right? So I believe so strongly in the power of one. Now I get it. There's a room full of people right now, and so when we worship, it's a little easier to worship because there's so many people. But I believe all it takes is one. And one of anything can start a movement. And so we've seen God use one church in 1 year to affect one community. I've seen the power of one all year long. And so I believe, and today I want to talk to you about this for just a few moments. I believe so strongly in the power of one encounter with God. I believe one encounter with God can change everything. I'll tell you, the day I gave my heart to Christ, I didn't wake up that day saying, you know what? Today's a good day. I think I might give my heart to Christ later today. It was just one encounter with God. All of a sudden, I was in God's presence, and he showed me who I was and who he was calling me to be, and that there was something more. And I said, I don't want to be that person. So one encounter with God can change everything. One committed follower of Christ can change everything. One time sharing your faith with someone who doesn't know Jesus can change anything. One act of obedience and surrender when God calls you into something can change everything. One generous gift, one saved marriage, one step of faith, one prayer, one person, one church sold out to the Great Commission can change a city. And I know I sound stupid saying it, but it's true. One. But here's the truth is we all want to see a move of God, right? Well, if you don't know Jesus, you don't, and that's okay, and I understand that. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you would say, man, I want to see a move of God. The things my grandma talked about growing up, I want to see that in my lifetime. The things I watch YouTube videos and people getting healed and people getting set free and cities being radically changed, like I want to see that. I do. I don't know if you do, but I do. And so when I look at that, it can be a little overwhelming. But did you know that it always starts with one? Many ones equal a movement. It's not just a big group of people that show up sporadically. It's one person saying, I want to pursue God in a new way. It's one person that says, I won't let the generations of disbelief in my family keep me from knowing God. It's one person that says, I'm going to lead my wife. I'm going to lead my kids. It's one person that says, I'll serve. I'll jump in. I'll fill a need. It's one person saying, my heart breaks for those that don't know Jesus, for those that are eternally separated from him. My heart hurts. And so my one self can affect everything. Many ones equal a movement. So I told you I want to talk about the power of one, specifically one encounter with God. I want you to know one encounter with God can change everything. I'm going to read from Acts chapter 16 today. If you have your Bible, you can turn with me. If you don't, it'll be on the screen. I'm going to read through at the beginning. It'd be easy to skip this, but there's many towns listed, so I'm going to butcher some of them. Don't worry about it. But there's a point in why I'm reading it. Acts 16, we'll start in verse 6. One encounter with God. It says, Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. They wanted to go to Asia, but God said no. Verse 7, when they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. Okay, so let's just put some cities you would know, right? So they wanted to go to Fountain Hills, but they had to go to Ahwatukee, and then they had to go to, name all these cities that they would struggle to pronounce. That's what we just read, right? They wanted to go to the province of Asia, and this was a good thing. I want you to hear this. Paul's a man of God. He's the author of 60-some% of the New Testament. And so if you've read any of the New Testament, you've probably come across Paul's writings. And so he desperately wants to take this gospel, this message that Jesus came from heaven to earth, lived a sinless life, died, and was resurrected. He wanted to take this message to Asia. That's a good thing, right? Okay? We're a responsive church as well, so the more you nod or make noises at me, it actually will go faster. So he wanted to take this to Asia. This is good news for the church. So why is it that God said no? It's interesting, right? Because wouldn't God be in favor of this? Yeah, the gospel going to Asia, an unreached people group, this is good for God. But Paul wants to go, and God says no. This wasn't their plan A. Their plan A was Asia, and God was changing this. So I want to stop here for just a moment. Why did God say no? I think this is so important that we wrestle with this question. Because I don't know about you in this room, but maybe you're here today and you've been desperately trying to have a child and it just hasn't happened. And so you may be struggling with, God, why isn't this happening? Maybe you've been praying about a promotion or you've been praying about a new job and it's just not happening. And you're wondering, God, why is this no? Maybe you've been trying to reconcile a relationship and it isn't happening. And you say, God, why is this a no? I think it's important that we ask these questions. Because if we don't wrestle with this no, here's what we think about God. God didn't hear me. God doesn't care about me. God is too busy for me. If we don't wrestle with this no and ask honest questions with God and then sit still and listen for him to speak, then we'll get really discontent with how God's doing things in our life. And so why did God say no here? Or why does God say no to us? And this isn't the point of my message. I just felt like it was important to talk about. God's always thinking about the things that will harm us. So many times the things that we want to do, we wanted to go to Asia, but what if there was like a militia waiting there ready to just take them all out? Maybe God saw that ahead of time and said, yeah, this is going to harm you, so I'm not going to send you into harm's way. I'm going to say no so that you won't be harmed. Maybe it's the wrong timing, right? The gospel eventually went to Asia. We know that. But it just wasn't the right timing. So maybe when God has said no to you, maybe it's not a firm no. Maybe it's just the timing's not right. And God's going to promise something. If God promises you something, I can tell you this right now, he cannot fail on that promise. It's impossible. It's actually outside of his ability. He can't fail. That's one of the few things he cannot do. He can't fail. So if he promised it, you can hold on to that, but maybe the timing is wrong. Or maybe he has something altogether different than this. Maybe it's just totally like this job, it makes sense to me, I want it, I need it, my bills demand that I have it, but it's just not happening, and maybe it's because God is doing something different that you can't see. And that's what was happening as we continue in verse 9, we'll see that. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia. Imagine this. Paul had a vision of a man of Macedonia standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia and help us. I would imagine he was desperate in his vocal, how he was saying it. Verse 10, after Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. Okay, so here's what just happened. God said no. And I don't know how many days in between, but they're wondering, what is God doing? When are we supposed to go? How is God going to do this? And then we see that God sends a vision of a man crying out, come help us. And the thing that I love most about this is it says that we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia. Macedonia wasn't on the itinerary. This was not the plan. Macedonia is modern day Greece. They wanted to go to Asia. God wanted to go to Greece. These are not the same thing. And so what I see here is, right, many times God says no, and what do? We sulk. We become distant. We stop praying. We stop worshiping. We stop attending service. We stop connecting into community. When God says no or we feel disconnected, our number one thing we do as humans is to isolate. And so what I see here, I don't see Paul sulking. I don't see Paul saying, well, I guess God's just not going to use us. I guess God's going to use someone else. I guess my days are over. I see an anticipation that I'm waiting for God to speak, because as soon as God spoke, it says that they got up and went. That means they were ready for when God would say, it's time, let's go. I prepared a people for you. It's time. Let's go. They were ready. They were anticipating that God would speak. Someone, you need to hear that today. If God said no, or you're in a season of waiting or wondering, or you feel like you're in the wilderness wandering, can I tell you today, just be ready, because God's not leaving you there. It's not God's plan that you would wander and not know. God is going to speak. And I don't know how he'll do it. He'll do it through his word. He'll do it through a person. He'll do it through worship. God will use nature. God will use a donkey. God will use whatever. It don't matter. Just be ready for when he does, because we see them get up and go when he spoke. Verse 11. From Troas we put out to sea, and sailed straight for Samothrace. And the next day, we went on to Neapolis, okay? So these are just multiple ports they had to stop in to get where they were eventually going. Verse 12, from there, we traveled to Philippi. This would be a familiar city to many in this room. If you've read the book of Philippians, that was the city of Philippi, okay? So from there, we traveled to Philippi. This is the first time there. A Roman colony and the leading city of the district of Macedonia. This was actually a very significant place that God was sending them, but it's not the place they would have chose. Now today, historians and geographers, they actually call this place that they went to the gateway to Europe. This is actually an incredible launching place for ministry, but they didn't know that when God said no, and then God spoke through a vision to go somewhere else. This was actually the best thing that could have happened to Paul. And so I don't know what season you're in with God. But this was the best thing, but it was wrapped in what seemed like mystery and what seemed like, I don't know what God's doing, and I don't know why he's sending me here. But this was the best place they could have sent him. Next verse says, and we stayed there several days. So they got into Philippi. They got set up. Verse 13, on the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. Just a couple quick notes about this. So it's interesting that they didn't try to find a synagogue, a church. And what I conclude here, it doesn't say this, but what I would conclude is that there wasn't a synagogue represented in the city of Philippi. And I want you to know how significant that is, because it only takes 10 Jewish men to start a synagogue in this day and age. And so you're trying to tell me you didn't have 10 people that love the Lord that would start a church in a huge, big city? Like, is that for real? Well, yeah, I think it is. As he went around, he found no synagogue, and so he said, okay, let's just find a house of prayer. And so they would set up these houses of prayer next to rivers, because when people wanted to get baptized, they could do it right away. Also, just ceremonial cleansing, they would go into the river to be cleansed. This was a natural thing to do. So they went down towards the river, hoping to disconnect, hoping to be by themselves. Again, what they expected to happen is not what happens. And so I want to read to you what happens. So they go there expecting to have an intimate, singular moment with God. Next verse says, we sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. Wait, I thought he was going there to see a man who was in his vision. All of a sudden, there's a group of women. This is not what I expected, God. Verse 14, one of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. Okay, I want you to know why this all matters, right? Because you could skip by this. Okay, cool. You met some women. You met a lady named Lydia. Awesome, right? Well, in the New Testament, Luke, the author of Acts, he rarely uses a name to describe the person. So later in Acts 16, just the two stories that immediately follow this, Paul, they meet a demon-possessed girl, never give her name, and then they are imprisoned and they meet a jailer. He's just called the jailer. So the fact that Luke tells us her name, her profession, and where she's from is actually highly significant. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But we find all these things out about Lydia, that she dealt in purple cloth. There were two types of purple cloth. There was kind of the generic one, and then there was the really fine one. She dealt in the really nice, expensive purple linen. And actually the town that she was from, which was in the province of Asia, that was actually known as the Mecca of purple cloth. So let's ask the question, why is Lydia at the river in Philippi when her very profession, the best place she could have been is in her hometown? Why is she there? Why is Paul wanting to go to Asia, and all of a sudden he finds himself in Philippi by a river talking to a group of women? Why? She was very well-to-do. We know that about Lydia. Anyone that would be in this profession would have a lot of money, a lot of influence, a lot of respect. And so we know these things about Lydia, and it says that she was a worshiper of God, and I don't want you to miss this, because this matters so much to the story. Because if you were to just read this, it kind of sounds like she loves the Lord, right? She's a worshiper of God. Actually, how this language is used, This actually would speak to her being a Gentile, which means she was a non-Jew, okay? So she was a Gentile who had a reverence for the Jewish God, but this was not Jesus. And so she was a worshiper of God. She had a reverence for God, but she had never had an encounter with Jesus. Okay? So Paul is seeing they're gathering, they're meeting, they're talking, they're being respectful of God. They're probably talking about all kinds of other things and whatever. But he steps into the middle of their conversation. They weren't expecting Paul, and Paul was not expecting them. I love this next verse. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. What was the message? Well, the message was Jesus. She had never heard about this Jesus. She heard about a God as a creator. She heard about God as someone that, created man, and she would probably respectfully agree with those things. But Jesus, being the Son of God, sent from heaven to live a sinless life and die a death that we deserved, and that he would raise from the dead. This was like newsflash to Lydia. She had no idea about this Jesus. And so when it says that she responded to Paul's message, this is so important. Because we're in America, there's a church on every other block. I'd be hard pressed to think that this is the first and only time you've ever heard Jesus preach. It's possible, but probably a little bit more unlikely. So what I see here is that the Lord opened her heart to respond. What does it mean to respond? When Megan was like, hey, who wants to win something? Pull out your raffle ticket. Now, you could have had the winning number in your pocket, but until you pulled it out and responded to what she asked, now you have the opportunity to win. You have to respond. You can't just hear it. And so when it says she responded, that means she transferred ownership of her life over to Jesus. Here's what this looks like. It's like a deed of a house. And when you sell your house, you sell all of it. You don't get to keep, I'm going to take that chip of paint off that wall, I'm going to show them, right? No. You sell the house and you sign the deed and you're moving on to something else, and they're going to stay. That's what you do when you come into a relationship with Jesus. It's so much more than words. It's so much more than raising a hand. It means I'm going to respond by giving my life over to Jesus, trusting that he can do more with it than I ever could. I'm going to give him my sin. I'm going to give him my shame. I'm going to give him my doubts. I'm going to give him the great parts about me. And I'm going to say, Lord, this is all yours anyways. I'm giving it back to you, but I have to surrender all of me to do it. And so we see Lydia respond, not just hear it and say, yeah, Jesus sounds cool. I'll add him to my life. I'll add him to what I do. She responded by giving her whole life over to Jesus. Verse 15. When she and the members of her household were baptized, watch the progression. She got saved and immediately chose baptism. That's why we do it. There's no other reason. It's because we're obedient to the order in which God laid out. And so if you're in this place and you've made a decision to follow Christ and you've never been water baptized as an adult or someone that was old enough to choose it for yourself, in 2 weeks, I would implore you to get baptized. And we're going to do it right. We'll make it so easy. We'll have shorts. We'll have everything you need to get baptized in 2 weeks. But we see her get saved and her whole household was baptized. She invited us to her home. This is the last verse. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us, which means they probably wanted to go, because it kind of would have been a little taboo, right? Single woman inviting a bunch of dudes into her house, come stay with me, right? It could be a little weird, like, yo girl, you faking? Like, what you doing? She persuaded them, no, I'm the one. I just had this one encounter with God, and this one encounter with God, it's changed everything, and so I want to do something about it, and I want you to see what really this meant. When she invited Paul and his companions into her home, what she did without even knowing it is she started the Philippian church. When you read the book of Philippians, this was the first church service at that house. She was the person that said, you don't have a synagogue, you don't have a building, but guess what? I have one house and I'll be one leader in it, and so go ahead, use my place. And so the book of Philippians is actually written to the home church that was started through Lydia, who just happened to be at a river one day when Paul showed up. It's one encounter with God. But it's even more than that, right? The gift that just keeps on giving, right? And so there were actually 5 books in the New Testament that actually were launched out of this one home church. The book of Philippians, the church at Philippi. Then you have the church at Thessalonica. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians is written because the church that formed out of Philippi went to Thessalonica. That was another church startup, another church plant. We get those 2 books of the Bible. And then we have the city of Corinth. This is all in the region of Macedonia. Wow. The place they didn't want to go, the place that they thought God would be better served to send them to Asia, the place that they resisted, but when God spoke, they went. This place launched the church at Philippi, the church at Thessalonica, and the church at Corinth, which we get 1st and 2nd Corinthians from. So 5 of the most incredible books of the Bible were written through a group of people that just happened to meet a lady at a river, hanging out with their girlfriends, talking about what they're going to do later. I don't know what they were doing. But when God interrupted, it changed everything. So one unexpected and unplanned encounter with God changed a country for generations. 2,000 years later, we're reading about one woman. It was just one. It doesn't say that all 50 of the women, it was one. Can I tell you today that a move of God in your family can start in you? Can I tell you today that a move of God in this church can start with you? A move of God in this community can start with you. You don't got to wait for 50 people to sign up on a sheet and say, I'll do it with you. One encounter with God, one person sold out to the Great Commission can change everything. This is never what Paul could have predicted would happen. He never would have known that this would actually be how the gospel would get into Asia, would actually be, he was going there for a man he saw in a dream, but he met a bunch of women, and Lydia was actually the one God was sending him to see. How incredible is it that it was just one encounter with God? I'm going to finish with this story, and then we're going to give you an opportunity to respond. I'm not going to bait and switch you at all. I'm believing that the reason you're here today, right? Lydia, why was she at the river? Why was Paul in Macedonia? I believe God was arranging, God was intersecting a lot of different people for such a time as this. And I believe that you maybe showed up here today because we're having a bunch of stuff to do. There's a football game, there's giveaways, and great, I'm glad you're here. But I believe God was up to so much more than just that. Because he knew that he just needed one encounter with you to forever change you. And so I'm going to finish with the story. There was this college professor, and at USC for years, 20 years, over 20 years, every single year, he would get up on day one. He taught a class, and he would get up in front of 300 students, and he would basically let them all know, I'm an atheist, I do not believe in God, there is no God, and I'll prove it to you. And anyone in this room that believes in God, you're a fool. Because you're denying the facts. You're denying the truth. Every year he would start his class, his semester, the exact same way. If you believe in God, you're a fool. And then he'd ask the whole room and say, is there anyone in here who's a fool that believes in God? Stand up. And for 20 plus years, not one person ever stood up. And so they'd go through their semester, and the last day of class, after all the tests were done, all the exams were finished, he would stand up in front of his class, and he was basically sending them off for the summer, and he would tell them, hey, just want you to know, God isn't real, and anyone in here who believes in God, you're a fool, and I'll prove it to you. Is anyone in here a Christian? And he would do the same thing every single year. He'd take a piece of chalk, and he would hold this piece of chalk up, and he said, if God was real, if God was all-powerful, I could drop this piece of chalk and it wouldn't break. But as you know, chalk, right? It's going to definitely break. It's very fragile. And so every year, no one would stand up. He'd drop the chalk. It would shatter on the ground. And he'd say, have a great summer. God's not real. Every summer. And so for 20 years, no one ever said, I'm a follower of Christ. And so this one year, there was a freshman in college, this young man. And he heard this at the beginning of the semester. He didn't say anything. He was scared. He looked around. No one else stood up. And so he said, okay, I'll just let this thing go. On the last day, as the professor's getting up and sending students away, as he starts to hold up this chalk and say, hey, if God was real, if God was powerful, he could stop this thing from breaking. He holds it up. And he says, does anyone in here believe in God? Because if you do, you're a fool, but stand up. And so this young man stands up in the back of the room. And this professor is about to use this platform to humiliate his God, right? Because God can't stop this chalk from breaking on the ground. So he holds this up and he said, I want to show you how weak your God is. And he holds this piece of chalk up and he goes like this to drop it. And when he goes to drop it, it rolls down his arm, hits the cuff of his shirt, comes onto his pants, gets stuck in the pleat, comes all the way down and gently rolls off the edge of his shoe. And the whole class is like wide-eyed, what's about to happen? The professor actually just bolted out of the room. He would resign not long after that. And this piece of chalk that laid on the ground, this one freshman boy got up, went to the front of the class, picked the chalk up, and started to talk about how real his God was, and started talking about his relationship with Jesus in front of 300 students. He led many young people to Christ that day. One encounter with God, one encounter can change everything. So young person, seasoned person, no matter where you at with the Lord, can I tell you that today, one encounter with God could change generations of you and your family's lives. And so I just believe so strongly that God brought you here today so that he could do something in you. And so, again, I told you, we're going to have a moment of response as we close today. And so if you feel comfortable, just bowing your head, closing your eyes, I just want to talk to you for just a moment. I want you to reflect on God's word and what God's been speaking to you. And I think there's probably two types of people in this room today. Number one, there's someone that kind of seems a little bit like Lydia. You know, you don't know why you're at where you're at in life. You're working a good job. You're doing the things you know to do, but maybe today you're sitting by the river and then God shows up. And maybe you've had an idea of who God is. You've had a respect, a reverence. Maybe you've went to church here and there, but it's never been more than that. It's always just been a respect. And maybe today was the day that God used all of these other things to get you into his presence, to experience worship, to hear a word about one encounter changing everything. Maybe that was exactly what God was up to. And so today, maybe you're a little bit like Lydia, and you're going to have an opportunity right now to hear that Jesus was sent from heaven to be the full sacrifice for our sin. He came so that sin and death and separation from God would forever be crushed, so that we could have relationship with God, so that we could have freedom from sin, so that we could have victory in this life and the one that is to come, that we would have eternal life with Jesus. That's why he came. And so as Lydia heard this, she had a choice. Will I respond to this by giving myself to Jesus, or will I just stay with a head knowledge of who God is? So today, maybe that's you. Maybe today is the day where you're going to say yes to Jesus, and you're going to walk away from that part of you or that version of you that has always tried to do it on your own, and you've just stayed in your guilt, and your identity is fully wrapped up in who you are and what you can do and what you can provide. And today you're just going to say, God, I'm tired, I'm worn out, I don't want to do it like this anymore, I want to do it your way. And so I accept the free gift of salvation. I turn away from my sin, I acknowledge my need for a Savior, and I say no to myself, I say yes to Jesus, and today I go from death to life. Maybe that's you, or maybe you have a relationship with Jesus, but you're just kind of going through life right now. You're just kind of going through the motions. You're just working a job. You're doing the best you can to be a good dad, a good student, a good son. and you just feel like there's a void of real significance in your life. And I believe today that the Lord would tell you, I just need one moment with you. I just need one more time of prayer. I just need one more time of worship. I just need one dedicated heart. I just need one time of devotion. I just need one. And you're the one. And today you would say, I don't want to leave here the same way I came in. Today I want to take the next step. I want to pursue the Lord in a new way. We're going to do this the same. I believe there's people in this room, you need to respond. What I mean by this is to get up out of your seats. We're a response-driven church. You could do it in your seat, but I believe it's so much more. Jesus went to the cross. He didn't just tell us about the cross he died on. He went there so that we could see it, so that it was visible. And I believe today there's no other significance than you getting up and responding. I believe if you're one of those two people, you would say, I want to know Jesus today, and I don't. Or number two, I want to be used by God. I want to have one experience in God's presence that could change everything. If that's you, on the count of three, I'm just going to invite you to stand up, come to this front. We're going to kick these house lights off just to give some privacy, and we're going to finish in worship. We're going to celebrate, and we're going to believe that God's going to show up. On the count of three, if that's you, this is why God brought you here today. And then we'll do all this other stuff. But right now, God's doing something right now. 1,